I really appreciate being invited here. And I'm not a theorist traditionally of leadership, but I hope some of what I have to say has some kind of resonance or makes some kind of sense to what we're talking about in our kind of broader discussions. So what I want to talk about is what we call the high cost of CEO leadership. And I'll try to keep to the 12 minutes because I think it's important. So it is based on a book which is coming out in July called The CEO Society, How the Cult of Corporate Leadership is Transforming Our World, which I wrote with Professor Carl Rhodes at the University of Technology in Sydney. And we was looking at this because we had a kind of main question, which was, why in a time when the free market and CEOs are being dramatically challenged in practice, the ideal of CEO leadership is increasingly revered? We wanted to ask a kind of what we thought was a simple question that might have some profound implications. So if you look, for instance, at a contemporary example, in the United States, one of the least respected figures, if you ask people, are CEOs. Do you think CEOs are good for society? And pretty much aligned with serial killers and bankers, most Americans would say, no, actually, they have a problem. We have a problem. We pay them too much. We don't know what they do, really, and it's a serious issue. And yet, they elected someone whose primary function is a CEO. And if you look at the polling and ask, why would you do this? The work that's coming back is those things. Well, he's very decisive. He knows how to get things done. He's a winner. He's a CEO. We found that a very interesting tension. So why, when CEOs in practice are really being challenged, they're still revered as a type of leader and a leadership paradigm? So we looked at two answers. Okay. The first is that we think that CEO leadership provides a false sense of hope and agency in an increasingly perceived out-of-control world. And what we mean by that is the fact that there's a range of forces, right, ranging from globalization, economic complexity, even I think some of the things that you've talked about, political complexity, in which people feel completely out of control over. On a more critical level, when you look at something like neoliberalism or marketization policies, people feel massively disempowered about their ability to shape on an individual and collective level, right, their own destinies. And I think CEO leadership stands as a very strong ideal for people to say, I can take control. I can be decisive. I can figure out how to increase my value. I can lead a profitable life. And I think this kind of reinvestment in CEO leadership is increasingly shaping contemporary economic, political, and even interpersonal relationships. So historically, we link this to what we call the rise of the CEO society. And it really has a lot of its beginning in the 1980s with this kind of free market ideology which began to emerge, particularly within the Anglo-Saxon world, as you would call it, between America and the UK. And it was this idea, right, that CEOs can replace the state as kind of main drivers of economic growth and social innovation. So that financial actors and CEOs, and I have a picture of Lee Iacocca. You can probably tell from my voice that I'm American. And I really remember growing up, I grew up in Baltimore, which was very, very far from Detroit. But growing up in a working class kind of union family, we kind of saw Lee Iacocca as someone really problematic. But I remember very clearly there was this shift, even as a very young person, around this idea that it was going to be CEOs, not unions, not the state, who were going to be visionaries and were going to drive us forward, right? And this is kind of in the literature you've seen that this is a little bit of a replacement from the kind of former staid and almost rather anonymous figure of the company president, right? And it was kind of taken over by a new popular image of the visionary and dynamic executive. So what we talk about is the fantasy of CEO leadership, right? And what we talk about is how this desire for a strong, decisive leader who can win in an uncertain world, right? Who can take control of an uncertain world. And it's based on some research that we did on questions of market rationality, right? This idea that you can somehow see through the matrix of capitalism and figure out the ways in which you can be successful and get ahead of other people and rivals. And it plays on this notion of this kind of myth of the CEO hero who provides ontological and psychic security. Okay. So we then looked at this in the economic, political, and interpersonal sphere. From the economics, we looked at what we can call an executive cycle. And it's a type of CEO rationality for organizations, right? It's an idea that an organization is in crisis and needs to be saved. And the only person who can do it is a strong leader with a strong vision, right? And here the CEO hero, as we say, rescues the organization. And in doing so, provides a kind of rescuing notion of what a CEO can do. And again, when you look at organizational dynamics, they're complex, right? We live in a complex time. But there's this continual cycle of, I can make sense of this, I can see through this, and I can lead the way. Now, what we'll talk about a little bit later, I mean, Steve Jobs is a prime kind of example of this, right? Now, if you actually look at the evidence, it's kind of interesting that I think he's now had 2 Hollywood biographies made of him. When in fact, and this might be a little bit controversial to say, Apple hasn't actually offered that much. I mean, the main innovation that Steve Jobs has done to the American economy and the world economy is actually showing that there's a business paradigm where you can get people to buy essentially the same product every year for higher prices. No, it's true. I mean, all their technology was our taxpayer money. And also, essentially, if I can say, Indian and African technologist in the 1980s. I mean, that was sold to Apple. So there's this idea, though, that he's this visionary and he can rescue this idea of innovation. The second is politics, right? And we looked at what we can call an executive bubble here. And instead of an economic bubble, which is this notion of, you have strong economic confidence that then's kind of popped, if you will, that you can have an executive bubble. And people have talked about a political bubble around finance. But we look at an executive bubble where you have this strong sense of confidence in a leader. I think Eva talked about this, the elected king coming, and he's going to change things and drive us forward. And then that's quickly popped when it's realized that's not precisely the ways in which you can actually achieve change. That's not precisely the ways in which you're going to achieve the progress you desire. But we link it specifically towards CEO values as well. And I remember before Donald Trump, there was George W. Bush, the MBA president. It was a big deal that he got a Harvard MBA. That somehow made him be able to have a new form of leadership. And it was this idea that he was going to rescue the nation, Inc., right? And in a more kind of things is that they're the political savior in a competitive global world, right? He's going to get and help us win the global economy. But I also think this plays on interpersonal relationships. So we have an executive existence, right? And one of the things here is that you can see is this idea of running your life profitably. It doesn't matter what you believe in, okay? It doesn't matter if you believe in the market. It doesn't matter if you want to work for an NGO. It doesn't matter if you want to achieve massive social change. There are techniques that CEOs provide, a kind of quasi-mystical wisdom about how to be instrumental, maximize your goals, and get it done, so to speak. That's a very American way, right? We're going to get it done, right? And it's infesting almost all areas of our life. If you look, for instance, at a variety of things from friends' websites to dating websites, there's a whole ways in which people think not merely calculative in a big data way, but calculating as a CEO. How can I maximize my talents to get what I want? And there's a whole thing, CEO of me. And there's also CEO of your love life, which I found kind of scary. So what I want to end with in the last 3 minutes is this idea of CEO salvation. And it's this idea that on every level, there's a notion that the CEO wisdom is going to save a world in crisis, whether it's your own personal world, right? I've just lost my job. I broke up with my partner. I know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to go ahead, get it done, and find someone new. Or a world in crisis, right? Jobs are down. Employment figures are obviously manipulated. Our politics is broken. We need someone strong to help us save our world. And yet, I want to offer some critical reflections on this as well. There's an idea of how can we solve capitalist problems with capitalist methods? How can we solve the problems created by the free market with free market thinking? There's a common refrain that, oh, we can't run our country like a business. And I would say that we can't run our business like a business, right? And so there's a way here as well that just as people are losing faith in the free market, they're picking up faith in a CEO leadership. They're saying, of course I don't believe in the free market. This was Alan Greenspan. I mean, what is that voodoo? I mean, he went from the most, probably the smartest person to someone who has probably little less credibility as a shaman in many ways, as people would say in America, unfortunately. But there's an idea that CEOs can still save us. We can't believe in the free market, but we can believe in CEOs. So what I want to end with is the high cost of CEO leadership. Firstly, I think that it represents the idea of shorting the world, right? Short-term solutions for long-term answers, right? It's an idea that we promise a lot, and then we sell out quick. And this goes toward the environment, this goes to the economy, this goes towards our social relations. Second, and just very quickly, this idea of bad faith is CEO salvation. And this is a kind of an existential term. We've given over the freedom to rethink leadership paradigms, rethink paradigms of power, to the easy answers of CEO leadership. And it's a type of existential bad faith that infects all of us, I think. Not all of us, but many of us on a collective level. And that's why we need new leadership paradigms for a new age. We need to go beyond thinking that executives can solve our problems. We need to go beyond thinking that we want to be executives. We need to fire CEOs and give up and quit our executive existence. So thank you very much.